hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is my Women in Translation Month recommendation video. So Women in Translation Month takes place in August, and it's also known as Wit Month. It is really the celebration of female voices, the books that have been translated into English, and it came about too because it was a way of raising awareness to the disparity and lack of representation when it comes to women in translated works. So I think the number when Wit Month was established was like 30% of translated works into English are written by women compared to men. So it is a celebration, a way to raise awareness, and also to give these authors their due. So I basically have compiled a list, some of books that I've read and really enjoyed. Others are books that I have on my radar and really hope to get to soon. Wit Month to me was really inspiring when I discovered it last year, to the point that it became one of my goals for 2021. So it's something that I feel very, very strongly about. But I'm going to insert a little plug here, and it's going to be really awkward, my apologies, but I did actually create a list on my bookshop.org shop with the books that I'm going to be talking about today and some others. So if you're interested, certainly go check that out. I will have linked it for you in the description box. And now that awkwardness is over, let's dive into it. Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about the books that I've read already and that I really, really enjoyed. And the first two are actually by the same author, and if you are a subscriber to this channel, you probably already know who the author is because I can't shut up about her. But the two books that I want to talk about are written by Magda Szabo, and her work is translated from Hungarian, and the two books are The Door and also Abigail. So I'm going to talk about Abigail first. Abigail is a really interesting one, and it's actually the second of her books that I read. I read it earlier this year. It is considered YA, and it's really, really a fun romp. It's set in an all-girls boarding school in Hungary, and the girls get up to all sorts of hijinks, as you would expect of adolescent girls, but it's set in the backdrop of World War II, and so you have a lot of sort of history also woven into the story when it comes to what is going on in Hungary with the different sort of revolutionary elements, I guess you would say, and some of the discontent and the paranoia. But it is a book that is set primarily at an all-girls school, and the character Gina is really impulsive, somewhat obnoxious in some ways, but with the two Magda Szabo books that I've read, it's also really beautifully written. There's something about her writing style that I truly enjoy. But if you're someone who really likes YA, I would recommend this book to you because there's something there. There's some sort of magic with the kids at this boarding school and the stuff that they get up to, and it's just a lot of fun. The other book, which is the first of the Magda Szabo books that I read, and this one was actually one that I read for Wit Month last year, is The Door. And this is a book that is about the relationship of these two women in Hungary after the war, after communism and all that. The main character is a Hungarian author, and the other woman in the story is Emerence, who is this curmudgeon of an old housekeeper that the author hires to take care of the house for her. And it is the story of their rather bizarre, sometimes antagonistic relationship. But what is so fascinating about this book is you start off already having a sense of how it ends. You start off the book knowing that Emerence has died and knowing that the author blames herself, but you spend the entire course of the book learning how Emerence dies and why the author blames herself. And it's this book that is this constant unfurling of these truths and these secrets about Emerence and her past and her life and the relationship of these two women. and it was just chef's kiss. Like, it was one of my favorite books of 2020. I absolutely adored it. I read this and quickly went to see if there were more books written by this author because I enjoyed it that much. So these are two books, very different in tone. This is more YA, or definitely more YA, and then this one is more adult, but the characters in them are so fascinating. The writing style in both just makes me wish I could read it in its original language for sure, but I enjoyed both regardless. Then the next book is one that I constantly forget is a translation, and that is The Book of Anna by Carmen Bolosa. I am really bad at Spanish. I am sorry, but it is translated from Spanish. And this is interesting because it's technically a sequel to Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which is one of my favorite books of all time. But this is a sequel that you don't have to have read Anna Karenina prior to in order to enjoy. So the book is set years after Anna Karenina has taken place. Her two children are adults, and this book is really set during the time period of the Russian Revolution, so in like 1905, Bloody Sunday in particular. And it's this book that the characters are somewhat aware that they are characters, because there's something kind of like Inception-like about the book, in that Leo Tolstoy did write Anna Karenina in the universe of this book, but he based it on a real-life person. And so Anna's children, especially her son, knows of the book, knows of the fame of the book, and constantly makes these references to the fact that he feels like he's a character in a book, which obviously he is. So there's something very like weird and experimental about that, but the story itself is set in this really interesting time in Russian history with revolutionaries and anarchists, and you get little bits of what's going on in Russia. But this was really interesting to me. Yes, it is slightly more experimental, I would say, but it was really enjoyable, especially for someone who really loves Leo Tolstoy and Russian history. So, highly recommend. The next book, I feel like a little bit of a broken record because I have spoken about this book a million times on this channel. It's a favorite of mine. The author is one that I'm obsessed with currently, but I could not put together this list and not talk about this book. And it is Suite Francaise by Irene Nemirovsky, and this is translated from French. And the story behind this book is really interesting, and I'll kind of give you the too long didn't read it version, but essentially Irene Nemirovsky was well known as an author in France, but when World War II happened, she was taken captive by the Nazis, and she was murdered during the Holocaust. And this book is one that she did not get to complete. So it is an incomplete manuscript, technically. But it is one of the most beautiful books. The writing style, like, the fact that this could be a first draft and it is as well written as it is still blows my mind. Like, still, I can't get over it. But the book is really split into two parts. The first part is this like mass exodus of refugees from Paris, and so you have all of these individuals whose lives are intersecting as they're trying to flee Paris, and their lives would likely not have intersected much, if at all, if not for this moment in history. And so you're following all these characters and kind of seeing the different experiences that they're having as they're fleeing. And then the second part of the book that is set more in this bucolic, like, country, village, or town in France is really about the German soldiers who are now being billeted within the French homes and French farms, and the relationships that develop between the German occupiers and the French people in this village over the course of the occupation. one of the really impressive things about this book is sort of the observations that Irene Nemirovsky is making, because she's living through all of this. And so the way that she is able to describe the emotions and the like extent to what life is like in that time is so real, so raw, and so fascinating that it blows my mind, quite honestly. But it is an unfinished book. So if you're someone who is going to be really annoyed by not knowing how it ends, maybe skip this one. But like, Irene Nemirovsky is fabulous. I'm actually trying to read another one of her books this Wit month. So yeah, but couldn't have this list and not talk about this book. Okay, so the next books are the books that I'm interested in reading. They are my TBR. A couple of them are on my physical TBR, and the rest of them are like on my digital TBR. They're books that I have in a shopping cart somewhere but just haven't pressed that button yet. But I am genuinely really, really interested in reading them. The first is one that I do have on my physical TBR though, and that is Eventide by Therese Bowman, which is translated from Swedish. And from what I gather, it is about a professor at, I think, Stockholm University. And it's really about her navigating like the academic world, and has this commentary on women like as professionals and their relationships. And I think that there's going to be like some sort of romantic relationship or feelings for like a postgraduate student that she is teaching. But I remember when I picked this book up, there was a line here that really interested me, that was that she navigates the academic world with its undercurrents of eroticism, competition, deceit, and fear. And it just sounds delicious. I am really, really intrigued. But I really am also fascinated by this look at the distorted like standards and expectations that women have to deal with, both in their personal lives and in their professional lives. So this is a book that I've had on my TBR for a little while and definitely want to get to sooner rather than later. The next book is another one that I have on my physical TBR. I think I tried to get to it last Wit month and didn't manage it, but the book is Cherie and the Last Cherie by Colette. It is a book that I'm really fascinated by because I've heard so much about Colette but have yet to read anything by her. But this book is described as the most honest, most sensual, and most poignant breakup story ever written. And so the book is about this like courtesan who is ending her like passionate love affair with this like playboy that's half her age. So the courtesan is like aging, fading supposedly, and it's about their relationship and kind of, I guess, them trying to like untwine themselves. That was the word I was going for. Untwine themselves from one another emotionally and sexually. I think that's what it's about. But it's like pre-World War I France, which is really interesting to me. And then the last of Cherie is apparently an epilogue that was written to the book. So I'm pretty interested in reading both. But yes, this is like a modern classic, which I love, so I do need to get to this ASAP. But yes, this is another one translated from French. Okay, moving on. So the next book is on that digital TBR that never ends, and that is Moonbath by Yannick Lehan. And this is another book that's translated from French, but it is written by a Haitian author. And I'm actually reading this for my work book club for Women in Translation Month. They finally decided on one, and I'm really interested in this book and was glad that it was selected because it's not like anything I have read to date, And I really do want to also read more translated works by BIPOC authors, because I do know that's kind of a place where I have a blind spot and I need to do better. But the book seems like it's going to be really interesting and really compelling. It is the story of several generations of women who are living in the political turmoil in Haiti, and it's a book that is sprinkled with superstition and voodoo and romance and even violence. And I don't really know that much more about it, but there's something that just sounds like really poignant, really interesting, and really different from other translated works that I have read or that I'm going to be reading this month. So yes, this should be a really good one, and I think that Yannick Lehant is one of like the most prominent Haitian writers. So this is promising. This sounds really good. The next book is The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, and to be quite honest, it's my biggest shame right now that I have not read a single book by Isabel Allende, because I know people that have read her books and absolutely loved them. They are considered some of their favorite books of all time, and I'm just over here like, yeah, I need to fix this soon. It was a book that I had as like a potential for this Wit month, but it ended up not being in the cards because, as you will see if you watch my August TBR, there are a lot of books this month that I need to read. But I believe that this is the first book of hers, or maybe it's the one that actually like catapulted her kind of into literary stardom. I do think it's a book that has a little bit of like magical realism elements going on in it, but it is translated from Spanish, and so the book I think spans like several decades and is about this one family, the like very volatile patriarch, his polar opposite, his wife Clara, is the one that has connections to like the mysticism and spirit world, supposedly, their daughter, who has like some sort of illicit affair, and the child that's produced from said affair. So it's about this family. I love family sagas. Like, magical realism and I don't always get along, but there's something about this that seems really fascinating to me, and I also feel like it's a good place to start to like introduce myself to Isabel Allende. So sooner rather than later, I will get to this book. So the next book is, I think, the only nonfiction book on this list. But listen, when I discovered this book, it went on my TBR so fast because it screams Brittany, it screams this channel. It's called The Unwomanly Face of War and is written by Svetlana Alexievich, and it is translated from Russian, but apparently the author spent like years, traveled thousands of miles, visiting like 100 or more villages to record the oral histories of Soviet women living during World War II and collecting them to create this story. And these were women who were on the front lines, who were living in occupied areas, who were taking care of the sick, kind of every type of woman living during World War II. And I love Russian history. World War II fascinates me. So this being like an oral history with so many stories captured just screams read me. So this is a book that I actually already ordered, so sooner rather than later I will read it. I'm kind of contemplating maybe using it for nonfiction November, since it's too late to probably add it to my history challenge TBR in August. But yes, this seems so good, and also love the fact that it's translated nonfiction. Like, I don't come across that often at all. If you have other recommendations for that, certainly let me know. The next book is one that's translated from Turkish, and it's called The Last Train to Istanbul by Ais Kulin, whose name I know I am butchering. But this is also a World War II story, but it is fiction. So apparently the main character is the daughter of one of the last pashas of the Ottoman Empire, and she falls in love with a Jewish man, and then World War II hits, and basically the Germans, the Nazis, are invading France, and it's, I think, the story of them trying to get this young man, his family, other Jews, and other persecuted individuals out of the clutches of the Germans, but there's obviously going to be some sort of, like, romance element to it, but I'm really intrigued. Like, listen, World War II historical fiction is basically its own subgenre. It is really oversaturated at this point, but I'm always looking for those stories that seem really unique to me. I haven't personally read much about, like, the Ottoman Empire in World War II. I also, with the exception of, like, the Irene Nemirovskys of the world, I haven't read that many books on World War II that are translated works either. So this really appealed to me, and the cover is absolutely stunning. That red just screams read me. There's, like, something really beautiful and gripping about it, like, visually. So yeah, this is another book that is on my TBR. I have no idea how many books I've just talked about, but the next book is A Greater Music by Bae Sua, and she is a Korean author, and this is a book that I saw described as, like, a book of memory. From what I gather, it is about the story of a Korean writer who is house sitting for her on-again, off-again boyfriend in Berlin when she falls through ice, and it triggers, like, this series of memories of, like, her, I guess, very vaguely defined present, but also, like, when she moved to Berlin 3 years ago. And I don't really know much more than that. I do think this is a pretty literary type of book, but I really liked the description of that it riffs on, like, music and literature, and that it has an emotional ending. Like, that really appealed to me. I love books that make me cry. So that, like, emotional ending, I was just like, okay, done. I'm interested. You have me. You have me, take my money. But yeah, this is a book that's translated from Korean, and I believe that it was nominated for or has won a couple of awards for the translation. So really, really interesting idea to me. I do think it's going to be, obtuse sounds like a bad word, but, like, a more, like, cerebral type of book in general. But yeah, very interested in that one as well. Okay, and the last book that I'm going to talk about is The Widow Queen by Elizabeta Sharonzinska. And this is a book that was translated for the first time this year. It was one of my most anticipated releases of 2021 as well. It is translated from Polish, and I do believe that it is the first book in a historical fiction trilogy. It is set in medieval Poland, which is a time period in Poland that I know next to nothing about, but apparently there are these 3 sisters of a Grand Duke or something of that sort, and he sees them as pawns that he can use and marry off to create alliances and gain wealth and that sort of thing, except there's one of his daughters, the main character, who decides that she wants a throne for herself and not a husband at her side. And so I believe it's the first section, as I said, of this trilogy, and she just sounds badass. I'm really into it. It's a time period I know nothing about. There's no book that I can, like, comparatively say, like, touches upon any of the same sort of ideas or the same geographic location at that. So it really is pretty damn fascinating to me. I also believe that Katie over at Katie Reads and Rants read it this year and really enjoyed it. So it's a book that I certainly need to get to, because yeah, I was really excited about it when I discovered it, and I just haven't found the time to read it yet. But yeah, I have no idea how many books I just talked about, but hopefully you found a few recommendations to add to your Women in Translation TBR, or just your TBR in general when you want to read a translated work. As I said, some of these books are books that I've read. Others are books that I am really excited about and want to read myself, so definitely stick around because I'm sure they will work their way into a future wrap-up video. But I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!